Thank you. Appreciate it. So many different people in this room, like just looking at you all, I think about kind of like my journey as an entrepreneur. And there's a lot of people who pontificate about entrepreneurship. And I can say a lot about that. You know, we live in an age where speaking about your work, paneling, kind of like talking about work post like TED is a lifestyle. And entrepreneurship is something that particular people from marginalized communities, people who've had to deal with the exploitation of labor, have always had to live hand to mouth, to hack systems to figure out how to survive, socially, politically, psychically, spiritually. And I'm really connected to that history because of my parents. So a lot of this, and a lot of what Michelle said, is Tayyib does a lot of things, but I'm a part of, cliche word, ecosystem of people who are deeply engaged in making their communities better. So I should also say, I go back, so Meta Global, all right? Meta stands for Megan and Tayyib. My business partner, Megan Denenberg, who doesn't like, I don't like to pontificate publicly, but she definitely doesn't like to do this. So that's a kind of our inside joke that she comes first in all of our investments. So Alan asked me to do this, and at first I was like, oh man, really? And in February, you know? Because everybody asks Black people to come out in February. And I looked at all the dates. I was like, cool, September. And he was like, come on, man, February. And then he said, invest. And I was like, invest? You want to talk about investment? Really? In the poorest and largest big city in the nation, where like almost 250,000 people are functionally illiterate, or where in some of the neighborhoods where we work, there might be, you know, $12,000 or $10,000 per student annually. Or in the western suburbs, it's approximately $25,000 to $30,000 per student. So do the math on a class of 20 people. You know, within a class, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars or more investment just in one class. And in my own personal journey, I had a lot of difficulty finding a pathway to education. And I'll talk about that throughout. So if you go to ebuild.org, a recent study came out this year that non-white school districts are $23 billion less invested than white school districts, right? Again, I'm deeply connected to that history. I've always, up until, you know, my adult life, most of my life I lived in redlined, underfunded, divested communities, and that inspires a lot of the work. So if you think about the definition of invest, there's two meanings. Obviously, most people think about the first. For me, it's about the second. To provide or endow someone with something or a particular quality or attribute. My parents and the community they came from endowed them with a concept of cooperative economics, you know. And I won't get into dynamics of socialism, capitalism, and all that jazz, but the people that brought me into this world were deeply invested in the collective benefit of financial independence. So does anyone know the biggest investment in Philadelphia in 1971? Anyone? Anyone? I was born. So these are my parents, Billy Smith, Denise Smith, born Denise Fisher. When she passed, she went by Sheba Dahomey. She recreated herself. Dahomey actually being of Western African heritage, Sheba being the Queen of Sheba. So there's an author who I really love at Duke University, Mark Anthony Neal. And he defined people like me as soul babies, born post-civil rights in the kind of the heart of Black nationalism. But then in our adolescence, we were kind of punched in the stomach with Reaganomics, divestment of urban communities, the late stage effects of urban renewal, post reality of white flight. So in my mind, in the first 5 years of my life, everything was fly. You know, like I knew people who owned businesses. There were jazz musicians who lived in the co-op where I live. Police officers came on horseback, and the kids fed the police officers horses. You know what I mean? So, and that was at the Friends Co-op in what is now called Northern Liberties, but in a galaxy long, long ago was called North Philadelphia. And the Friends Co-op has been there, I guess, almost 100 years. Teachers, firefighters, so on and so forth. Really almost like otherworldly for me as a child. But on the outskirts of that were the Richard Allen projects, where my parents met, the Green Street projects, where my aunt lived. And in my little childhood mind, I was in the upper class. You know, there was all this concept of, you know, we had equity. There were a lot more events and my cousins who lived, and you know, just 3-4 blocks over. Even as a child, I thought like, oh, I don't live in the projects. You know, I live in a co-op. We had a social hierarchy just within a couple blocks, and like things like that, I realized in my middle age as a Gen Xer were fundamentally developed by my formidable years and the people who invested in me. So yeah, you know all that jazz. So over here, these are the fellows from a program we created called the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship. This gentleman here, I've known since he was born. This is Ursula Rucker's son, famous poet from Philadelphia that I used to work with when I worked in the music business. This is Amira Smith. She used to work at the film office. She's now an entrepreneur. This is Veli. He goes by Veli Brand. He's a very big music promoter, like I used to be in a former life. Over here, these are different people who are in my life from the Black Star Film Festival. I've been on the board there for about 6-7 years. Here's my friend, Erica Atwood, who is now Chief of Staff for Councilwoman Jamie Gautier. Now, I thought I first met Erica working on the Hope campaign with Shepard Fairey. Actually, at an event you set up in Chestnut Hill. Yeah, we'll come back to that. But Erica will curse me out and say, motherfucker, I met you way before that. So I'm on a bunch of boards, Black Star Film Festival, Prism Art Fair in Miami, which is the largest Caribbean and African diaspora art festival in the United States that happens during Art Basel. I'm on the board of Memphis Slim House, which is a community co-working space across the street from the Stax Watts Museum in Memphis that does all kinds of programming to help people find careers through music, but also through workforce development. I'm on the board of the Greenlight Fund, which helps scale nonprofits around the country, but they started in Boston. They kind of have a venture capital model. They're in Cleveland, they're in Detroit. We've been doing the work in Philadelphia for probably about 5 years. So this just kind of explains like my partner and I's philosophy on storytelling and how to have a positive effect on community. A lot of the complications in urban development, public policy, I feel, is maneuvering through the minutiae of nomenclature. There's very complicated ways to say simple things. So there's a nomenclature for finance, there's a nomenclature for architecture, there's a nomenclature for tech, there's definitely nomenclature in real estate. You know, it's like something I learned this year. A lot of politicians, a lot of public policy makers, a lot of bureaucrats will talk about workforce housing, right? So being in real estate now, I started to look at workforce housing, and there's something called AMI, Area Median Income. right? So for a lot of projects in the city, when they talk about area median income, the area median income is from Harrogate and Kensington, where the AMI is actually $17,000 to $20,000. But the way we do it in real estate, the AMI goes from Harrogate to the western suburbs, right? So, and actually, oftentimes, someone like me, as a real estate developer or a politician, or anyone in real estate can say, well, this is a workforce development project. This is an affordable housing project. To the audience, that sounds like that's for them. They're thinking about the type of environment I grew up in, where you had land, housing co-ops and affordable housing through the government. But the AMI actually is for people who make $76,000 to $126,000, all right? So if you're a single mom in a neighborhood where achievability works in West Philadelphia, I think I learned that in 2003, the average single mother who was head of household was making $29,000 a year. By 2013, they were averaging $13,000 a year. All right, so algorithmically, cities are changing all over the world. And people, the working class and the working poor, are being pushed into the suburbs, away from mass transit, away from, frankly, opportunity. And without an intersectional, socioeconomically intersectional, pragmatic, thoughtful lens, we're only going to complicate those things more. So through art, culture, music, all kinds of different ways, we try to affect the larger conversation of what people are thinking about. So, 215, does anyone remember this?
I do.
Oh, Mercedes used to work for 215. All right? So I brought one so people could pass around. And I didn't notice, so I brought this here. This is like a before and now we used to do in every cover. And it actually is a before and now of, this is the corner of 9th and Vine. And then that same corner, I believe, is in the documentary I just showed you. I didn't even connect that till today. So like I've been trying to tell the same story in different capacities. Yeah, so we can pass that around. So a lot of people think fondly of this. This was a nightmare for me. You know, my previous career in the music business, I think of as like college, and I think of 215 as like graduate school. A lot of people got great jobs post this. They got great tear sheets. I even lied for some people so that they could get better jobs at like Condé Nast. They're like, oh, he was great. He always shows up on time. Oh, yeah. Like, just get in there. You better do better than you did me. All right, so this particular cover, I holds a special place in my heart. Like, so the American flag is behind it. This young woman's born in the U.S., but her parents had immigrated here. And we did this after there was this controversy in South Philadelphia because there was a gentleman who owns a cheesesteak space. I no longer eat meat, so we won't get into that. But he wasn't allowing people to order who didn't speak in English. And I know, as a third generation Philadelphian, as someone whose family lived in South Philadelphia, his parents didn't speak English when they lived in the neighborhood, right? So as how we market South Philadelphia, or how we market 9th Street, is through a very particular lens of European migration and upward mobility. I don't know how many of you have walked 9th Street recently, but most of the people of European descent who are working there every day are visiting or purchasing. The people who work there are the contemporary immigrants. So that really offended me. We created a whole issue around immigration, and we did all kinds of stories and interviews with people who had a different perspective around immigration. And for me, immigration is about the exploitation of cheap labor. Some of the other covers we did, again, you have to remember this is 10 years ago, so I think this is before Jimmy Fallon got down. Each issue, we would try to cover different things. I was like, either one of these issues, I know we did a story, an analyzation on gun laws in Philadelphia. And there was a graphic in there that I thought people should know about, but because of it, they wouldn't allow us to be in any of the hotels in the city. A lot of restaurants were like, we don't really want to talk about that. Now, 10 years later, I believe there's more firearm fatalities in the city of Philadelphia than there have been as of yet days in the year. All right, so these are the types of things we were trying to talk about through this publication. And it was like this intersection of trying to sell something in an era of urban development where people want to talk about the more positive things, but not really wanting to do the really deep dive about why some of the aspects of our urban environment are as they stand. So Little Giant Creative. That's how I do most of what we do. Little Giant is something that people used to call me when I was a promoter because I didn't want to use my name. Some people said it was because I was a short person with a big mouth and bad attitude, but I won't get into that. So we have all kinds of clients. We work with organizations like, we've worked with Penn Meds. We've had a lot of success with the Knight Foundation. We work with Temple University. Diverse client base, usually helping someone or helping institutions with what we like to call cultural competency. So how to speak to diverse audiences about complicated things would be another way to say it. This is our process. So a couple other projects just to touch on. Philly 360, does anyone remember that? Okay, so Philly 360 was the first multicultural tourism campaign in the city of Philadelphia in 2009. All right? How diverse is Philadelphia? 67% POC, about 45% African American. All right? The first time the city ever marketed itself through tourism was in 2009. Marketed itself through diverse tourism. So that came from a study that found there were more African Americans within a 3-hour drive in the Northeast United States who tended to spend more when shopping, going to a restaurant, or an overnight stay than anywhere else in the country. So it didn't come from altruism. Sharp Insight was a project we were fortunate enough to be a part of that was funded by the Knight Foundation, where we did discussions and activations around voter literacy and the importance of civic engagement in barbershops. As most of you know, regardless of what your heritage is, the barbershop, the hair salon, holds a very special place in the African American community, in all communities, but I think in the African American community, it's for generations has held a space of independence, a space that was free, a space where people congregated, debated, so on and so forth. So, City Hall Presents. We did 33 art activations in the center of City Hall. To the best of my knowledge, I think that was the first time there was ever a rap show in the courtyard at City Hall. We also work with Pennsylvania Ballet, Ballet X, all kinds of different institutions. Heineken Green Room, has anyone ever heard of that? So Heineken Green Room is basically how I've been keeping the lights on for a very long time. So Heineken USA is our best client. We've been their agency of record in Philadelphia for a decade and New York for about 5 or 7 years. We've done work for Vitamin Water. That's some stuff we've done for Drexel University. We actually did the branding for Cherry Street Pier. Women-Led Cities is a project that my business partner Megan Dedenberg created, which was a think tank and symposium exploring urban development through a feminine lens, what a lot of people might not think about, if, up until modern history and still, most cities, most of our environments are created by men. Most of the social intelligence that exists within the household in regards to cradle to death has existed within the women in our community, from childcare to everything. I won't even pontificate. Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship is a project that we won a Night Cities Challenge grant for in 2016. That was a 3-year, was it 3 year? Yeah, 3-year call for ideas, $5 million a year in 26 cities. We made the finals of 150 people in 2016 and 2017. We won both years. Out of 4,500 applicants a year, right? So that's the only time in my life I've ever been a 1%er. Was able to get a lot more wing beneath our wings in regards to people taking our ideas more seriously. From working with the Knight Foundation, I was fortunate enough to be brought into an ecosystem of people nationally who were exploring some of the things that we'll talk about a little later. So, through the Institute, me and I always kind of debate, complain, argue about our social political environment. And something we noticed was a lot of the people who had worked for us, or a lot of people that we were mentoring, had desires to be entrepreneurs, but were removed from capital, removed from ecosystems of mentorship, deal flow, and most of the accelerators or incubators, whether they want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, don't do a really good job at executing it. So we want to develop something using the language, the ethos, and the pathos of the history of hip hop and all the different people who created their own careers, like myself, to create the Institute. So Knight Foundation gave us about $300,000 to create a 9-month incubator. We had a 2-month window to send out a call for applicants. We got 300 applicants in 2 months, whittled that down to 50 finalists, and then 24 people participated in the incubator for 9 months. In the 8th month, they all have to come up with a final idea, and then they compete. 3 people came away with $10,000. So from this, I like to think of this almost being like the software for our next project, which is the IF Lab. IF Lab will be a physical space. IF Lab standing for Idea Factory in Harrogate at 3400 J Street. Through our development company, Smith & Roller, in partnership with Shift Capital, we are creating an entrepreneurship hub for the community of Harrogate, which has 51% unemployment, if you can imagine. There's my friend Freeway. If you're Philadelphian and you don't know Freeway, shame on you. A dream deferred. So this is the idea that Knight Foundation funded in 2017, was executed in 2018. So A Dream Deferred is a poem by Langston Hughes. It is an articulation, in my opinion, about the unrealized dreams of people, particularly who were going through the Great Migration, moving from the south to the north into cities that were not necessarily welcoming, and then were redlined. And prior to that, went through the process of urban renewal and deconstruction. A lot of promises of people's land being taken through eminent domain, and then that same land being vested to universities and private developers. So something you might not know is that the CIC Center and the Science Center, that whole area, that was one of the areas that was a part of the Black Bottom that was mentioned in the previous documentary, that actually like veterans of the World War II had purchased their first homes. They lost those homes. That land sat barren for a decade and then became a part of a new reimagined positive lens of urban development. So Dream Preferred deals with the history of redlining. It was executed through a year of public engagements, town hall meetings. We brought people like Richard Rothstein, who recently wrote a brilliant book called The Color of Law. In my opinion, it's one of the best analyzations of the history of public policy and basically how private industry and the government were culpable in denying American citizens access to capital. And there's a bunch of other ways that you could articulate it. Anyone who's been following the recent, I'll just say Bloomberg campaign and his misgivings in regards to speaking of redlining, it's always interesting and annoying for my partner and I that we're always, like there's something about us, we're like always like a little too early in the bell curve. Like last week, redlining was trending on Twitter, and I was like, could he have not said that dumb shit when I had an open exhibit? Like for real? Now, like every candidate is talking about redlining? Yeah, like, I had the same experience with co-working, but that's the whole thing. So, this is one of my favorite projects that I've ever done, and it's going to continue. We're working on creating the next phase and making the curriculum and the content available online for people to access anywhere. Redlining happened in 1,200 cities or counties in the United States. This story can be told anywhere. And those of you who might not be aware of it, get to Googling. I would say that you can't really have an understanding of cities or suburbia if you don't have an understanding of public policy through this lens. That's Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. This is one of the events and discussions that we held at WHYY. Truth to Power. This is another project I was really happy and fortunate to be a part of. So Truth to Power was a 3-day art exhibit with, I think, 100 artists that we did in the 900 block of Spring Garden during the DNC. All kinds of people participated, rapper, actor, celebrity, you name them. I'm on video, so I'm not going to say too much. I worked in entertainment. No disrespect to people I know who have become celebrities. I have no faith in celebrities in regards to politics. I think that oftentimes it just takes people away from the issues. I'm much more engaged in community health, wealth, and yeah, I'll leave that alone. So 10,000 people came in 72 hours. It was amazing. This is like, I don't know if you saw the debate this week, but that's what it felt like. This, by artist Michael Murphy. These are plastic guns in the shape of the US. And from a different angle, it points. I followed this police officer around for this picture because I was like, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get him. There's a lot of songs I could quote, but I'm not going to. Smith & Roller is our real estate development arm. So I mentioned we have a project with Shift Capital. If you don't know Shift Capital, they're a social impact investment fund. They've purchased approximately 2 million square feet between Kensington and Broad and Erie. Commercial, residential, primarily commercial. One of our first projects is partnering with them on a building called J Central, which is 126 apartments, no, 116 apartments, 30,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial, where IFLab will be one of the tenants. This project came from me and I having discussions with my partner, Jacob Roller, I guess over the course of like 7 years now, but years ago, I used to sit down with him and my other business partner in Pipeline, David Crosso, and I would ask them questions about like, how do you do development without displacing people? They weren't the only people that I asked those questions, but most real estate developers would kind of look at me blankly and be like, what do you mean? That's real estate. And Jacob was the first person to answer me honestly, and he was like, man, I don't know. I'm doing it right now, and I'm trying to figure it out. And we just stayed engaged. And then one day, he texted me, and he was like, have you ever heard of this guy, Theaster Gates, who's a very prominent artist in Chicago, who, when I met him, he was just an artist. When I got re-engaged with him through the Knight Foundation, he has 55 buildings in his portfolio on the south side of Chicago. Arguably, I would say that the reason that the Obama Library is going to the south side is to be in proximity to his projects. So the day that Jacob texted me about this guy, I was actually with him because Knight Foundation was fortunate. I was fortunate that they paid for me to be a part of a 9-month salon with people from 14 different cities looking at equitable development and workshopping once a month, basically trying to answer that question. After 9 months, I came away with more questions than answers. And that was one of the other things that inspired a lot of the work that we're doing currently. So what is equitable development? How do you do development without displacing people? How do you have a positive social impact on the communities where you are doing development? These are all really complicated things that without practitioners being engaged with cultural competency across socioeconomic stratus, we're not going to be able to answer. And those are one of the things we're attempting to do. Last year, we won an RFP for a CDC, well, a business development group that became a CDC called Midtown Cleveland, where we workshopped, did about 40 interviews with people in the community, with the Commerce Department of Cleveland, with the Cleveland Foundation, with the Gun Foundation, trying to help them figure out their roadway to actually doing ethical development. So here's where you guys get to invest. The Kensington Corridor Trust is a new project we're working on with Shift, where Shift Capital, Impact, I think somebody mentioned that they're Casey's neighbor here, IFLab, which I've spoken about, PIDC, now with Ann Nevins at the helm. John Grady has moved on to greener and probably more profitable pastures. Let's see. Oop. So the Kensington Corridor Trust is Shift Capital and my friend and brother Brian Murray. We're making an effort to raise $20 million to create the first corridor land trust in the region. It's I think you would say a Herculean effort. We've already gotten a $5 million commitment from the Ford Foundation. Linda Kind, Patricia Kind Family Foundation and the Barra Foundation have also made a commitment. So if anyone wants to write checks, I'm in the coffee area later. But no, in all seriousness, Kensington is one of the most complicated neighborhoods in the region. One of the deep complications is that for more than 30 years, I guess it's been, at the intersection of great public transportation, proximity to I-95, and a drug trade that is has many different aspects to it. So all the same reasons that an area like the other part of that, well, in close proximity to there, Fishtown, why Fishtown now looks like Williamsburg is because of all those different aspects. The investment of public transportation, density, what urbanists would used to call the street ballet, right? The same positive attributes can be negative attributes if you have a different ecosystem. But we're trying to combat that. Most of the time when people talk about Kensington, or if you read about Kensington, it's all going to be negative. A lot of complications about the safe injection sites that are on the way. But without thoughtful practitioners rolling up their sleeves and actually trying to make change in the community, this will just be in the path of gentrification. You know, if I had the opportunity to invest at Frankfurt and Girard like 10 years ago, I'd have been like, you crazy. With all those fiends out there, now I feel like a fool, right? Five-star restaurants underneath the L. It was unimaginable, right? And as a third-generation Philadelphian, and as someone who has lived in divested communities, it's almost like you can't imagine, right? And then you change a couple different things, and all of a sudden, now it's positive, right? Like, how can we do these things and make it so that it's positive for the people who live there now? How can we make communities so that people can live and prosper or have cradle to career opportunities or age in place? And it can't just be for people of a certain hue or a certain socioeconomic class. So this is one of the ways that we are currently working to try to make a positive impact in our community. Thank you.
I have a real quick question.